All right, welcome to the first episode of House of Tech. My name's Fred Schebesta.
I'm Andrew Bragg. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I'm worried you're going to be too serious.
I'm always too serious.
Yeah.
And we've got an incredible guest here. Who we got?
Ant Eisen from Afterpay. Or is it now Square or Block?
Ant,
Block.
welcome.
Block.
It's Block.
Okay.
First run around the block. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Ant, do you want to give us sort of the quick history of where did this idea come from? Tell us the rough story, the brutal story. Afterpay.
Well, I've got an incredible co-founder who was my next door neighbor, and of course, it was my idea, not his, because all good ideas came from me. No, only joking. Look, quite literally, I met this incredible man called Nicholas Molnar, who was living at his parents' place across the road while he was finishing university. And we met together because his light was on all night. And while I was working in funds management and investing during the global financial crisis, I might add, I saw a light across the road on all night for many nights in a row. And I thought there must be some nefarious activity going on across the road. And I started all these conspiracy theories, but it was young Nick selling the most jewelry on eBay in his final year of university than anybody else in Australia. So I was relieved that it wasn't narcotics and it was jewelry. But that's how our relationship started. The idea of Afterpay came about because, it actually started with a problem statement that became so incredibly obvious just from meeting an incredible person and having, a normal conversation. He wanted work experience. And I said to Nick, well, come down with me to Melbourne. I can introduce you to some people and, give me your credit card and I'll book a flight for you. And he said, well, I don't have one. I don't own a credit card, which I thought was really interesting. And it showed our age difference. So I'm humbly 19 years his senior, not quite 20, but 19. Where, getting a credit card was just a natural sort of thing for my generation when you finished school and, you tried to grow up and become responsible. But he didn't have one. He didn't want one. None of his friends wanted one, nor did they have one either. And that kicked off what ended up being a really insightful and incredible conversation about what is the next generation, what's their core values, why aren't they getting served properly? And when we think about the world of retail and commerce, which for Nick and I was really our home ground, how could we change a model that really emanated from that discussion about young people not wanting to fall into a debt trap with credit cards? So that's what kicked it off.
Wow, amazing.
So, there's been a lot of discussion about buy now, pay later over the last few years. And many people who've wanted to damage your innovation have wanted to do so because of competitive reasons. Now, we promised you we'd ask you some probing questions during this podcast. So we'll just kick off with a little one. Yeah. So do you think Australia is a nation of oligopolies?
Well, depends which sector and what you look at. But, what Australia has been historically is for the people of Australia in certain sectors is they've been underserved. Or they haven't enjoyed the experience that they've been given. And they've been so goaded into living life under a set of rules or principles that have been so tightly wound up in terms of what has been key players in certain industries that it almost becomes that's just what life is. And the most wonderful thing about our journey is not curing every part of that, but the simple innovation actually wasn't about technology. It was just giving people something that they wanted in a way that didn't take advantage of what we call like a win-lose equation. You know, there's so much about the finance industry historically where people have to lose for others to win.
Lots
I
of
know
bad
it's a
people.
really obvious, I know it's a really obvious point, but if everybody paid back their credit card balance on time, there would not be a credit card industry. It can't exist, right? So just turning some of those dynamics on its head made a huge difference to the one commodity that actually every single business has to trade in, which is trust. You know, the biggest thing we got when we launched Afterpay from our consumers, which was, okay, here's a payment method. It's 4 individual payments. It's the same price as if you paid cash at the counter. Pay back on time every 2 weeks, and there's no difference in the price. Everybody said to us, well, what's the catch? The whole country, the whole consumer experience as it relates to finance, point of sale, other types of whatever, has just been waiting for that gotcha moment because they've all sort of felt the ramifications of when it happens. So the biggest question we got was, what's the catch? But, you know, sometimes you can't start from the same place to deliver a new service, and business models have to come from a different place in order for them to make sense. But I think to your original question, the Australian consumer has just been underserved. And, you know, we've got so many incredible tech innovators in Australia, not just in the finance industry, obviously, but in a whole lot of areas. But the best entrepreneurs that I've met who will go on to do way bigger things than what we've achieved, I can assure you of that, is it starts at that consumer problem about how to make friction less in a system, and actually how to serve people better and being attuned to the way people want to live their lives. And I think when you can just tap into that and then it sort of scales, it's just magic, because it's scaling not because of some sort of twist or little economic tweak. It's because people are moving towards something because they feel like it's better for them than what they had before. So I think there's been not a lot of that, but I see Australian innovation moving in leaps and bounds across all areas of, you know, consumer service over the last 5 or 6 years since we've started as well.
I've got a question for you. So, I have an interesting moment in time, Anthony. I could imagine, you know, being first and being unique in a market, obviously in Australia in particular. There's obviously a regulatory moment in time where, you know, you have a lot of, I could imagine, lawyers saying what is possible, what is not possible, and there's probably, can you take us through the story in that moment when you're about to launch, and you got those tingles of nervousness, probably anxiety on both sides. You know, what was the biggest risk? Tell us about it.
From a regulatory perspective, yeah, look, I mean, you know, there hasn't been a moment in time when, you know, there was so much of what we did that didn't fit into just a neat box. And when you introduce something new, then it should be expected, albeit that we didn't expect it at the time. Like, we were a very much startup company, but when you don't fit into a box, then, you know, all sorts of things happen. Firstly, you have to be committed to explaining what you do. You don't have any data at the start to show whether what you're doing is good or bad, but you have a principle and a philosophy. When you start to get some scale and you still don't fit into a box, then all sorts of dynamics around regulation go from understanding to also competition and different facets of the society having a view based on competitive reasons as well as logical logical industry development reasons. So, look, for us, since we started, it was all about this new category that wasn't traditional finance, it wasn't traditional commerce, it wasn't traditional payments, but it was a blend of all those sorts of things. Our economic model never charged consumers in the way that traditional finance charged consumers. We charged merchants as opposed to consumers, which also made us not fit in a particular box. So, for us, what we learned after the first 12 months was actually regulatory engagement was part of our business and needed to be part of our business, and it needed to be about communication. Rather naively, we presumed that because our customers loved what we were doing, then it'd become obvious that what we weren't doing wasn't trickery. It wasn't putting people through the mill. It wasn't some bad product that people were going to use once and only once and never again. We got to 2 million consumers in Australia before we did any external advertising whatsoever. So it was literally growing through merchants and consumer word of mouth. But what we realized pretty quickly is that while consumers knew exactly what we were doing, regulators and other participants in the market, which were very important, actually didn't understand what we were doing. Often our story would be told by competitors or incumbents, which didn't reflect the truism of our model. So getting out there and engaging properly is what we had to do. And I think over time, that has led to more understanding. Part of the process of engaging with regulators and other stakeholders in the community, I think, is also about listening well, as well as just stating your case. So, we built our team to do just that, and we've made lots of adaptations to our service and our processes just to reflect what we think was a responsible position. But it was a new category that eventually got recognized. There's still elements that holistically need to be addressed as it relates to regulation. And we're finding as we expand globally, what we originally experienced in Australia is now occurring in other parts of the world. But we always felt confident, and still do, that the impact we're having on consumers is a good one. And when you look at things like default rates, whether people are getting entrapped or not, all the really significant elements about what regulation wishes to avoid in traditional finance, we feel the way that we've developed our product and our system addresses that in so many more ways. So it's not like that we shouldn't adapt or do more in the future, but we feel that once we have the opportunity to properly tell our story in the way that digital innovation can actually serve consumers better, then it becomes a much more productive discussion. But it involves work, and it's work that we'll continue to do, and work that will also make sure that we listen so we can keep adapting and obviously improving the service as we go, as opposed to just entrench into a position.
It's regrettable that some of the time you've expanded on this agenda, you'll never get back. And that is, that's part of the course, I expect. But, when I first met you a couple of years ago, there were people in government and in Canberra that were putting, buy now, pay later in with the cash converters guys and the payday lending people and all sorts of different nefarious people. And, you must have had some pretty fun, times. Tell me about some of the craziest meetings you had. Were you accused of eating babies or any particular great crimes you were committed of by these people?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We're all different human beings, and human beings are a funny sort of race when you really look at it. But Nick and I are actually guys that sort of tend to wear our heart on our sleeve, and in some ways, we're a bit naive as to the response that we'd get sometimes. Um, and to be honest with you, you want to be strong for your team and you want to keep growing. And, you know, we were scaling at such a rate and we took people's money, you know, from the market, etc. And that was like we had to do good by it, you know. So it actually, if I'm being really honest about it, it was the worst part of the journey. I think you've got to expect some of it, but you know, we had this really mission-driven energy to us. I mean, we hadn't stopped working for years and years and years, but more so than that, our team was incredible. We had people join us who worked for half the amount of money at the start from really big technology companies because they believed in, you know, the vision and the passion and how we were literally going to produce something that was good for consumers. But when you have constantly played back to you, particularly in the early years, what you're doing is bad, then it takes a lot of emotional energy as well as a lot of physical energy just to get through that and you know, stay strong for yourself and for the team. But what doesn't kill you sometimes makes you stronger. The hard part in this discussion actually is not coming across as just being becoming arrogant or belligerent, because the truth is when you introduce something new, and this goes for innovation everywhere, you know, it's generally poo-pooed before it's accepted. And, you know, when you're innovating, it is properly about discovery. It's not about wanting to do the wrong thing at any stage of the journey, but you actually don't have all the answers. So when you're talking about what your experience is, it's with new data, it's with new experiences, it's testing and adapting and doing that very quickly. But when you're in a fishbowl and you know, you're trying to move through that at pace and at scale and do the right thing, it becomes an obstacle point. But you know, having said that, I think everybody is better from the experience. I think when you get tested hard on these things, it's not a bad thing. And if you can work through it at the end of the day, you know, you come out stronger. But it was a pretty difficult thing to manage, particularly in the early days, if I'm being truthful about it.
Anthony, when it comes to, you know, obviously there's an Australian market, then there's a US market, and the US market is quite a brutal market. And then you're sort of, you know, starting to compete with, you know, these US tech companies and things like that. Tell us about the decision to sell to, I guess, to Block, and sort of what were some of the important things that you considered along that way?
Yeah. Well, maybe to the first part, first of all, I mean, like, there was a huge amount of trepidation going to the US at the start because, you know, growing up as I have done in, you know, the business community and the investment community before I got involved in a startup like Afterpay, you always hear of the difficulties of trying to expand overseas and all the companies that fail in their process of trying to do so. So, you know, we thought about that pretty hard as part of making the leap over. And we always tried to do it in a way where we'd test and learn very quickly. Sorry, that's my...
Have you got a dog?
Not today.
Oh, yeah. You don't have one? You don't like dogs?
Not really a dog guy.
You like
Sorry,
cats?
Cats.
Yeah, I like cats too.
Cats are nice.
that's Nala. She's part of the Afterpay team. But, you know, we went through this journey with quite a bit of trepidation. But the most fabulous thing was when we got to the US, we had some great people around us, some great advisors around us. But I think this speaks to the Australian tech opportunity, to be honest with you. We don't have the experience necessarily in Australia, but we certainly do have the talent. And when we put our team across in a new place just to have a go, you know, that Australian go-to-it attitude and ingenuity and workaround and working hard sort of just found a new space, and that really gave us our energy and our wings. And it's not a credit to Nick or I, but really to our team that was just so amazing, and some of the partners that we met that was, part of that incremental build just to give us a shot at launching in the US. But the same customer problem issue existed in the US as much or even more so than Australia. And that was what was amazing to watch. It was our merchants who sold into Australia that were global that said, we've never seen a customer response like this. Will you come to the US and give it a go? Because we think it will have the same response here. But that consumer reaction to being able to budget without getting into a debt trap involved in a very commerce like way sort of kicked off very strongly. But the core value that we've always had was, how do you offer consumers a service without putting them into a debt trap and turning the economics of an industry on its head? So you're working with retailers and they're paying for the service, but you're doing it through a platform that's building both sides of that equation, building trust, and that translating to better merchant outcomes while giving customers a great experience. I know it sounds cliche, but it's a win-win. And win-wins are really hard. I mean, people use the term often, but it's really hard to ever see a win-win in a financial contract or an arrangement. And that was the chord that we believe that we struck. When we met Jack Dorsey and his team at Block, it was an amazing experience for Nick and I, because as human beings, we saw people that woke up every day with that mission: financial empowerment, financial inclusion. Making commerce accessible to people is the entire reason that thousands of people in the Block organization get up every day. And when you've been involved in a startup and gone overseas, you understand pretty quickly the difference between someone who's reading off a piece of paper and somebody who's really feeling and living what they're saying to you. And it was almost as if we could exchange our mission statements. And while we saw incredible synergy when you look at the Block organization, particularly in North America, they have millions of merchants and 70 million annual active consumers in North America. So an incredible scale and a two-sided network, which if Afterpay can be the commerce link in between, that's where we saw the incredible synergy. But what sits behind that synergy is the purpose. When you look at Cash App on the consumer side or Square on the seller side, it's all about making commerce freer, easier, more simplistic, and more transparent. So for us, it wasn't a case of wanting to sell Afterpay. We didn't do one of those exercises where you hire a whole lot of investment bankers and you get the best offer. This was purely a case of saying, we're on a journey. We're very early here, but the whole consumer engagement environment around finance, payments, and commerce is changing in such a dramatic way, and it's led by the next generation, and we're at the early stage. How to take what we're doing global, we've done, but how to take the vision global is where we saw a counterpart that was unreplicable with any other potential player. So that's why we got so excited about it. So we're really only at week 3 since the transaction came to its completion. But, it's really that energy that's now driving our entire team as well as the Block team to get on with it. And, we're off to the races.
So, I mean, comparing these two great democracies that you've been able to work in successfully, much has been said about the founders of the United States talking about vested interests and that being a great scourge. But obviously you encountered great regulatory friction in Australia, where we probably talk about vested interests less. But I would say, certainly as an Australian politician, I would say that the vested interests will go out of their way to try and kill innovative companies like yours. So I was just wondering, I mean, what sort of friction did you encounter in the land of the what do they call it? The land of the
Free?
and the brave,
Home of the brave?
and the enterprise, right? The home of enterprise, free enterprise,
The citadel of capitalism.
the citadel. How did it go in the citadel of capitalism?
Well, you got to get really big in the US to make a difference, and I think to really answer that question properly. We're still small in the scheme of things. We've got well over 10 million consumers, which is way more than we have in Australia and the US. But, it's still growing fast. It's growing fast as a category, but it's also growing fast as a consumer segment as well. But when you look at the total payments landscape, there's still a long way to go. I actually think as it relates to your regulatory question, more broadly, I think that the US is an awesome country to do business in, but it's different. I don't think you ever get away from vested interests in any democracy or non-democracy, to the original question that you posed. But I think it's an incredible place to do business just because of the vastness and the opportunity that comes with serving different types of consumers in a whole lot of different areas. And look, it's got a mentality around business, which is as long as you're not doing the wrong thing, if it's serving the community and it's progressive, then let's not shut things down. Let's not have a mental barrier. And I think, that's one element of the US economy, which is incredibly refreshing, and it's always had that persona. In terms of our industry, Australia is actually ahead though. We started this whole thing in Australia. And when you look at the maturity profile of buy now, pay later, which is still immature as an industry, Australia is the most mature. So we've had more discussion, we've had more debate. And in a lot of ways, the education process that's gone on in Australia is happening at this point in the US. Some of the issues are different. One of the big issues in the US where our product serves the community really well is around financial inclusion. How you get credit in the US as a consumer is a really difficult thing. How you manage credit ratings to obtain credit in the first place or the second place in the US creates huge social issues. So, just introducing a service like Afterpay, which is far more democratic, appeals to different stakeholders in different ways. So there's different issues, there's different touch points, but we're actually ahead of the game in Australia. But as a place to do business, I think it's a fabulous economy, not just because of its scale, but generally because of its attitude towards wanting to embrace technology as a way to serve consumers better.
Well, Ant, obviously, every billionaire now is going to space. So when are you going to space?
I actually got a letter
from Elon.
Said, do you want to? No, there's nothing like that. That said you could enroll in some program to actually do that. So it was a fun thing to go and show my wife and daughters over the dinner table, which was preceded by a bunch of laughter and said, now go and take out the rubbish. Life hasn't changed terribly much for me, to be honest with you. I'm not going to space anytime soon. Just blessed to have a wife and 3 fabulous daughters, and we're just doing our thing. It's interesting when I get asked this question because in a lot of ways life has changed dramatically, but in a lot of other ways it hasn't whatsoever. For Nick and I, we still kind of feel like we're in startup world. And we've been acting like that with our team ever since day one. But it's just been a privilege to have a go. And with it, just comes the opportunity to meet some incredible people. We get to work with people today that we never, to be honest with you, we weren't even qualified to read their CVs and probably still aren't. But, you get that opportunity. You get that opportunity to sort of tap into people like Jack Dorsey, the team at Block and others in that universe, which are properly visionary forward thinkers. So to me, that's just been the most incredible aspect. But in the meantime, I put out the rubbish. My wife and daughters tell me everything that I'm doing wrong. And, life's pretty much the same.
Well, I've got a double header question for you, and it's a US style question. So, given that you have been able to revolutionise payments and the purchasing of certain goods, please explain why tipping in the US is so complicated, and as part of your answer, explain how Afterpay can fix that. And my next question is, what are home fries? I've never been able to work out what they are. And why are they called home fries? Are they from someone's home? Have they already been eaten before? Please explain.
Listen, just understand that they're not good for you. That's all you have to know, is just a little bit of moderation when it comes to the home fries front. Yeah, tipping is a big thing. Actually, money's a big thing. Moving money, writing checks. This is actually what still happens.
Checks?
To writing checks in ridiculously large volumes in the US. So, you've got this incredible crash that's occurring at the moment of sort of new world into old world, and the scale of people adopting better ways to move money is really what was a promise 5 years ago, but now is completely mainstream. And as you know, Senator, beyond that, blockchain, stablecoin, all of these different ways of using digital currency now is not just a theoretical phenomena. This is stuff that's happening, which is leveraging across how to make payments easier, more instantaneous. And, this is all happening in a crash course world at the moment. But what is hugely interesting to me about it, and where the opportunity lies, and I suspect this features in the way that you've been dealing with some of these, critical new issues of innovation for our country, is that all of these things used to exist in single pillar or single dimension industries. You had a finance industry, you had a payments industry, you had a commerce industry, you have an advertising industry, and then all these sort of different industries would kind of work together through simple connections, but they were individual, and the consumer would get served a whole lot of things in bite-sized areas, and they'd go to these different places. Everything is together now, or it's coming together. And I know terms like super app get bandied around pretty liberally, and there's a long way to go in some other areas. But the ability digitally and technologically to serve a consumer universally in the way that they want to live their lives, and having these services all come together, is the reality and the opportunity that's occurring through digital technology at the moment. So the way that gets understood by different facets of the community, including regulation, is critical, because it can serve the consumer in incredible ways if we get it right. That's the environment we're living in. So crazy enough, we've still got massive volumes of checks on paper being written still in some segments of the community, but you've got this whole sea change which digital technology and payments is bringing in on the other. And it's not going backwards. And I think for a lot of the incumbents, this is now recognized as being finally the point where fintech is really making huge inroads and will change the industry forever.
Well,
awesome.
Anthony, thank you so much for joining us on the House of Tech, the first episode. Obviously, appreciate you coming on and sharing all your wisdom.
No, just pleasure to be with you. Thanks for hosting, and appreciate everything that we're doing to spur on Australian tech entrepreneurs, because there's some amazing talent here, and we'll do great things. Thank you.
Thanks, Ant. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.